episode 141. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. This one is surely fun because I'm interviewing two of my friends and colleagues, and one of them I have published some of her books in the past, and one of them I have worked with on a variety of PR and media marketing things throughout the years, and now we're all romance writers, and we had the opportunity to discuss what this was like and moving from our different genres that we were in before and finding a publisher and all the things. I just know you're going to love Lindsay and Savannah, aka Christy. We just had such a fun conversation. So one thing I want to make note of is we are officially open for business. The 2025 ticket sales for the 2025 Women in Publishing Summit are available at womeninpublishingsummit.com. The conference is a virtual event that will run the first week of March. I believe it's March 5th through 8th of 2025, but we've already started our networking and our pre-bonus training sessions pre-conference bonus training sessions. And we're having a good old time doing all the things together, building that community, being #BetterTogether, all of the things. So if you want to join us while it's on early bird special, please go grab your tickets at womeninpublishingsummit.com. And if not, we hope to see you at some of our free events. We have at least one monthly webinar for no charge, and you can find those at womeninpublishingsummit.com/events. If you're a children's book author, a kidlit author, picture book author, all those different things we call you, we have a special 2-day training specifically for those who are in the process of writing a children's picture book, want all the information on illustration, production, formatting, printing, marketing, launch, all of those things. You can find that information on our events page as well. That's coming up November 7th and 8th. All right, thanks so much and enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, a place where you can come to get inspiration, motivation, help, encouragement, and support in your journey to write, publish, and sell your book. Hosted by Alexa Bigwharf. 'Cause I've been where you've been, and I felt what you're feeling, and I don't want to get in your way. Welcome back to another episode of Alexa's Publishing Chat. This is going to be a really fun conversation. I've brought in two fiction authors who actually neither started as fiction authors and have had an interesting journey into becoming romance writers. I've known both of these ladies for a very long time, and we met through completely other capacities. So I'm very excited to interview them on how the world is coming along with their romance writing. Okay, so my first guest is Christy Dash, who writes under the pen name Savannah Carlisle. She writes heartwarming romance novels with idyllic beach settings. Her stories transport readers to fun and quirky small towns where friends feel like family. In her other life, Savannah's name is Christy Dash, and she writes about something completely different, the business of college sports. She's also a very skilled PR rep, but I don't know if you're doing PR stuff for people anymore. No, you've completely exited that world, but you do help people who want to start travel blogs, right? And that's going to have to be a whole nother conversation another time, because that is a world that I know a lot of people, including me, would love to get into. But we'll have you back for that. Okay. My other guest is Lindsay Gibson, who holds a very special place in my heart. Her first book was published by my publishing house, Cat Biggie Press, and it was her memoir, Just Be How My Stillborn Son Taught Me to Surrender. Which this book won the Book Excellence Finalist Award in 2018. She's been featured in Elephant Journal, Green Child Magazine, and Self Magazine. She also created a workbook to go along with this and has spent a lot of time working with grieving mothers and doing things to help through her memoir. But she, like me, has taken the transition and jumped from the very serious grief to more fun writing, and writes emotional romantic fiction full of heartfelt love, good friends, and family, sprinkled with humor and tender warmth, where her characters discover that love is the reason for everything. Her debut romantic fiction novel, The Christmas Promise, with Harpeth Road Press, set in charming New England town at the holidays, is now available, and she's got other books coming out too. When not writing fiction, she's working on her exclusive weekly newsletter and the blog Love is the Reason, about all things love, food, and healthy living. She spends the rest of her days chasing her 3 daughters and hanging out with her Irish husband, whose brogue still makes her blush. And I'm excited because she recently moved from Connecticut to South Carolina, which I live in South Carolina. So we get to meet finally, after almost a decade of knowing each other, get to finally meet in person soon. So that's exciting. Thank you both for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
So
thanks for having us.
this is so much fun because, as I mentioned in that intro, we've known each other from different worlds, and all of us transitioned into writing some sort of romance, and it's really fun to have you both here and talk to you about this. And what I was super interested in about was Lindsay told me that you are both published under the same publisher, and you were doing this book tour together this summer. And I thought that is so much fun. I definitely want to get some insight into that and how that came about. But first, I would love to just ask you, like, what made you make the jump from the other things you were doing? And I'll start with Lindsay, especially because it's a big jump from writing on grief and loss to going into, well, both are big jumps. But what made you make this transition into writing romance?
Yeah, it was definitely a big, big jump. I actually had in the back of my mind, I would love to write romance and fiction. I always had my eye on that, but I didn't think it would come to life. Like, I didn't think it would actually happen. I had always dabbled with writing poems, like personally for my own self, and journaling, which I mentioned in my memoir, how I took a bunch of my journal entries and turned it into that manuscript. And so I always was dabbling with that idea. And actually, when I was writing my memoir, I wrote myself as a fiction character first
Hmm.
before I wrote those really hard scenes, because I
Yeah.
needed to like separate
Separate. Yeah.
and say, okay, here I go. I'm going to talk about the birth of Joe, right? The stillborn experience, and now I got to talk about the rape. And I had to disconnect. So I actually made a character look nothing like me, and then I wrote the scene, and then I just rewrote it with myself when I was ready. And
Wow.
I discovered then how much I love writing fiction, because it's you can control the ending. You can't do that when you go through trauma. You can't take back what's happened to you. I can't bring my son back. I can't change my past. None of us can. But when you write fiction, you can control the ending and what's happening. And I found that to be so therapeutic that that was my first spark into writing fiction. And I also wanted to continue spreading hope and love and inspiration with love. And so I wanted to show my readers that not only is love is the reason, but it's possible. And that's kind of what made me jump into the fiction writing.
I love that. And it's funny because my story is kind of similar on that. Like, always wanted to write fiction. And with my first rom-com, 4 Days in Paris, I actually wrote it during COVID when I was going through a divorce, and kind of for the same reason. Like, I took a really fun time in my life that didn't have the ending that I wanted. And I'm going through a divorce, and I was not happy, and I wanted to be happy. So I wrote a fun romantic comedy that had the ending that was more fun than what actually and it is. I love that idea of being able to change the ending and being able to create something happy, because so many of people who enjoy reading romance do it because they want that happily ever after and that fun. All right, Christy, what about you? I mean, sports writer, PR mogul, like how did the rom-com come in? You write rom-coms, right? They are, would you
No,
consider
it's
them?
kind of just straight contemporary romance. I wish I
Got it.
was funnier, but I'm not. Yeah, it's funny. I knew you were going to ask me about the transition from sports to romance, and I did write nonfiction sports first. And in fact, I'm working right now simultaneously on my second novel and on a new nonfiction book, and they're going to come out within a couple of months of each other in 2025. But as you were asking Lindsay about going from grief to writing about romance, I realized that that's a little bit of my story too. When I got my first book deal for a nonfiction book back in 2009, 2010, something like that. I was a practicing corporate attorney. I was writing about legal issues in baseball, and that's how I got my first book deal. And I ended up getting an agent for my next book, which was about college football. And I sort of knew that I wanted to write fiction, but what happened is that my college boyfriend died very suddenly and
Oh
very
gosh.
unexpectedly from a very fast acting cancer in 2008. And I have the worst long-term memory. And I remember wanting to like write down our story before I forgot it. I was so afraid I would forget these things. And so, kind of like Lindsay, I wrote it as a fictional character because I couldn't sit and write it diary style like it was my real life. And so I wrote it as a character. And the worst part is, I had an agent at the time because I was writing nonfiction and I had an agent for that. And she also reps fiction and romance and other genres. And I sent it to her to read like the first half of it when I got to that point. And she did not know that it was based on a true story and that
Mm.
the main character was me and that this was this guy I dated in college and now he was dead. She knew none of that. I didn't tell her any of that. So she sends me back notes on it and tells me how incredibly unlikable he is. And it broke my heart,
Oh
but she didn't.
no.
I just wasn't very good at character development and character arc at that point. That book will never see the light of day. I never wrote any more of it after she gave me that feedback. And
Oh,
I went back to working on my nonfiction. I wrote my baseball book, which, long story, it still hasn't come out like 13 years after it
oh
was
my gosh.
contracted, but that's a really different story. I wrote my college football book. It did come out. I changed careers. I became a sports business journalist, left practicing law, but I never like gave up that dream of writing fiction. I just was so, and it was not my agent's fault. She did not do it in a mean way, but I took it so personally
Yeah.
because it was my story
Yeah.
that I didn't get back to trying to write fiction until 2018. I had an idea for something that I had been mulling over for years, and I finally had the time to do it. And I ended up writing my second novel that will come out next year. So they ended up getting published in the reverse order I wrote them. So the first thing I finished and wrote, my agent took out in 2020 at the worst possible time. We just didn't know it. A week after we went on submission, the world shut down and it sort of died on submission. It only went out to 6 publishers. And ultimately, my agent and I parted ways. And that book just sort of died on the vine. And I wrote a whole nother book that ended up becoming my debut. And now that one that went on sub in 2020, that's actually going to be my second book coming out in 2025. So it's been a weird journey to get here.
It's so funny as you were telling your story. Well, I think the best fiction books like come from reality, right? And both, I think all three of us actually have very interesting life stories and journeys that would actually all of us would make great characters as the lead of a story. But I'm listening to you talk about all these things, and first of all, I didn't know about your boyfriend. I'm very sorry. That must have been really traumatic at that age. But we have such interesting stories behind us, which is why I love starting the question always with everyone is how did you get here? Because it's usually not, my life was boring and I didn't have anything else to do. So I just sat down and started writing. So thank you for sharing those stories. Um, okay. So the next thing I want to talk about then is you started writing these books, you got agents. Now you're both with the same publishing company, correct? And the name of the company is
Harpeth Road.
Harpeth Road.
Harpeth Road, and that company is a woman-owned, small, traditional, only publishes romance press, correct?
She does historical romance, women's fiction as well.
Historical. Okay, great. And how did you find this company? And I'm curious because I think both of you were, I don't know how were you two connected before this? I mean, we're connected to each other, so I didn't know if you were connected. No. Okay. So you got connected through the company, which is really hilarious to me. Like that whole the Kevin Bacon, except for it's like 2 degrees of separation here. How did you find this company? And just tell me, we'll start with Christy this time. Talk about like how you found the company, your submission process, and then Lindsay, you can jump on in the same questions.
Yeah, I'm guessing mine's a little different from Lindsay's. Because I was a journalist, I was primarily writing about sports, but I would also freelance and write about other things I was interested in, like travel, like you mentioned before, but also books, because I'm a huge reader and then also wanted to write. And so I started writing freelance pieces for Pop Sugar and Bustle and AARP about books. And I got to know this author named Jenny Hale. And Jenny Hale is the founder of Harpeth Road, but I met her probably close to a decade before she actually created Harpeth Road. I read her books and loved them. And so then when I started writing about books, I would naturally include her in pieces where it made sense because she was one of my favorite authors. And she started telling me about her idea for Harpeth Road maybe a year before she launched it. And I was like, That's it. I want to publish with you." I had my agent at the time. I'm actually on my second agent now. I was with my first agent. We were going out with that first book. Harpeth Road did not exist yet, I think in early 2020 when we went out with that. But Jenny gave me great advice on that manuscript, and we just stayed in touch. And actually, that manuscript, which is now going to be my second book, she initially passed on for a very specific sort of reason why she didn't think it worked for her as a small press. And after I ended up with her for my debut, I said, "Remember that manuscript I showed you a couple of years ago that had the country music singer? Like, can we revisit that?" And so that's how that became my second book. But she's somebody that I knew for probably a decade before she had a press and before I decided to publish with her. So it's been kind of neat to go from being her reader to being a journalist covering her to now
Yes.
publishing with her press. And it did not give me an advantage, guys, because she said no to my first book. And then
Right.
it was like a maybe with my next book I sent her. So it's not like I had an in. She's tough, but she's good. She knows what sells.
That's great. It's so funny. While you were telling us the story, I pulled up the website, and it's really cool to see both of your books side by side and the four of the newest releases on their website. And it's a great website. For our listeners, I will have the link to, if you're a romance writer and are thinking about working with a small press, I'll have the link in the show notes, which you can find at womeninpublishingsummit.com/podcast, and look for this episode. Okay, Lindsay, tell us your experience.
So, I mean, like Christy, I knew Jenny Hale. I read her books, but I was just solely a reader for her, of hers, and I actually didn't even know she had a publishing house until about 2 or 3 months prior to submitting what is now my debut novel, The Christmas Promise. I saw something on Twitter, or I'm sorry, X. I don't know. I still call it Twitter.
Me too.
And yeah, and I was like, oh, okay. Here's the funny thing. I had heard about Harper's Press. I didn't realize it was hers so I had known about Harper's Road, but I didn't know it was hers, if that makes sense. And so, because I wasn't really, watching everything that they put out. So then I connected the dots and I said, oh my gosh. And so Jenny has a heart of gold, and I'm not just saying that because she's my publisher, but she really does. And she works so hard, and she's trying to grow her company and everything. And she's, I call her a workaholic. I'll say it to her face. I mean, she's 12 hours a day. That woman is at it between writing her own books and trying to grow her publishing house. And when I submitted The Christmas Promise to her, it was not called The Christmas Promise back then. And it was not the book that is out today. I wasn't sure, I said, I don't have an agent actually. And so I submitted to her, and she does allow submissions without agents. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I just sort of said, let's just try, because like I was telling you before, I knew I wanted to write fiction. I wasn't sure if it was ever going to happen. It's like saying you want to be an actress, right? I mean, it's like, you just don't know. And I said, but let me try. I won't know unless I try. So my next step was to go get an agent after that. If this didn't do, if nothing happened, she got back to me, and it was almost like she was my teacher, and she is a teacher in her other world, right? She was a teacher for like 18 years or something like that. So she's got the teacher in her. And she said, okay, I see something with this. Can you do the following? And she just sent me a quick list of a rewrite. But she gave me it was as if we were in a classroom. I mean, she really gave me some sound writing advice. And I was so thankful for that, because I was thinking, even if I don't publish with her, this was so helpful.
Yeah.
And she always says, if only people can take the time with new writers and give them just a few snippets here and there, it'll be so much better for them, right?
Yeah.
So I did, and I actually kind of did the rewrite with her.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and she not entirely, but we went back and forth, and she helped me get it ready for she made it marketable, and she also said for editing, right? Get it ready for developmental edit. So again, it got edited another 2 or 3 times after that. I mean, that book took a year and a half to
Mm.
edit between submitting to her and then all the other edits on top of that. And it was a learning curve because I was like having to cut scenes and I was like crying about it. I was like, no. But it's so much better than what I had originally had. And so
Yeah.
she did. So from the time I submitted until she contracted, it was a good 8 months. So
Wow.
I really had to clean that thing up. And then once I submitted, or once she contracted it, then it was again more and more editing. And so that's kind of how it came about with her.
You know, there's so many things that I want to say on this. I'm just going to hit two key points, and that is one, to the point on the timeline. You know, I work with a lot of indie authors, whether they go through, they self-publish, work with a hybrid, or go with the small other press or whatever, or go with the self-publishing. It's just like all kinds of different writers. But I know that one of the things that I see a lot with indie authors is they don't realize what you just had to go through. Like they don't realize that that's the difference between books that get picked up by traditional publishers and surely the ones that get picked up by the big publishers is the amount of time and effort put into working on that craft. And so the message that I really want to get out here is if you've just written your first novel and it hasn't gone through a year of revisions and rewrites, unless you've spent like the last 5 years working on craft and you just happen to come into it already being like a really phenomenal writer, like that's often the case, is that Christy, Savannah, you were already a professional writer, so there's probably a little bit of a less of a learning curve, but even so,
No.
fiction is no, okay, so
It's
fiction,
not applicable at all. Writing like a journalist is not helpful
so
at all
true.
for me. I actually have to get out of some habits when I flip back and forth, especially right now I'm editing a novel and I'm writing the first draft of a nonfiction book, and it is like whiplash going
Yeah.
back and forth between them. But I also wanted to point something else out so that I didn't say about my journey. So I've had two different agents. When the book that became my debut, that became the Library of Second Chances, it was called something else in the beginning, but after we went on submission in 2020 and that sort of died, my agent wanted to see what I was working on, and I sent her what ended up becoming my debut. And she had someone at the literary agency read through it and send me notes, and she basically said, "You need too much help. I don't have the time to give it to you.
Oh,
I
no.
originally signed you for nonfiction, and we said we would look at your fiction. I'm not the right agent for you. I want to set you free so you can find someone who has time to work with you." And
Wow.
I was equal parts devastated and relieved. I had sort of felt like she was the right fit for my nonfiction, but that she was not the right fit for my fiction. I just didn't think we were on the same page about the type of romance. You know, I wanted to do like small town Hallmark, kind of romance. And I wasn't sure that was totally her thing. I don't, think it's what she read for pleasure. And she didn't have clients at that time really in that space. I loved her. And so like it was like being in a relationship where like you don't want to break up with your boyfriend because they're such a nice person and like they'd be wonderful for someone else, but like, and it's not working, but you don't want to do it. So I'm lucky that she broke up with me because I probably would have just floundered with her forever. But we broke up, I would say that was early 2021. And then I spent 2021 editing it with a developmental editor that I hired and who wasn't a great fit either, which is a whole nother story. And then 2022, I entered it in Kiss Pitch and I got a mentor, and I ended up with a mentor who had a really similar book in that we both wrote adaptations of You've Got Mail, Shop Around the Corner. They're very different, the final product, but like we both had our inspiration from that. And she had just gotten her book deal. Her name's Jessica Leppi. And she said, "I know exactly what you need to change because here's what editors said about my book, and it's in yours too. And I'm going to help you fix it."
Nice.
And I worked with her whole year. So I wrote this book in late 2020, early 2021. My agent dumped me in spring of 21. I edited with the developmental editor. I got a Kiss Pitch mentor 2022. I finally started querying agents, and I sent it to Jenny. Jenny was the only small press I sent it to at Harpeth Road at the same time I was querying. I ended up with 2 agent offers and the offer from Jenny, and I had my full out with like 10 more agents, several of whom stepped aside and said, "If you're going to take the small press deal, we're out." or said, you have to turn down the small press deal because I want to take this out somewhere bigger. And I really wanted to be with Jenny, and I ended up taking her offer, and I did not take either agent that was willing to rep me at that point because they didn't feel right. So I actually didn't get my agent till after that. So it sounds like I was agented and like it was easy to get this picked up on whatever. Like I spent 2 full years editing this after having my agent tell me all the things that were wrong with it and making me feel like it was just trash that I could never. She did not mean to make me feel that way. It's the way I took the constructive feedback. She was wonderful. I have nothing but good things to say about her.
But it's an important demonstration of these books. They don't just flow right out of you and you go through one round of developmental editing and then all of a sudden you have a manuscript that's well. And to be fair, there are lots of people who write fine books, that they're good stories and they're not awful, but they're not marketable at the higher level because of whatever reason. There's problems with the storyline, there's problems with, whatever. And so it's really interesting to hear you both talk about both the process, the amount of work that went into them, the rounds of editing, the time that it takes to get a manuscript ready to be traditionally published and to be marketable. And especially for a traditional publish, I mean, there's so much money that goes into publishing a book. I don't think people really realize how much money goes into a book that gets out there and is marketable at the mass level, right? And so they really can, especially with the small press, only take the books that they really believe in. So congratulations to both of you. I'm curious, with working with the small press, like I think it's something, I mean, you both have the ways that you met Jenny, so that was interesting, very different ways, but working with the small press, a lot of people don't even consider that as an option. They try to get an agent, they try to submit to the big ones, and when that doesn't happen, they just automatically jump to either self-publishing, hybrid press, or whatever. So I think it's great talking about these small presses. And if you do have any, like if somebody's writing romance and wants to, or any genre and wants to find a small press, I don't know, because both of you came at it from a different way, but do you have any tips maybe from talking to other authors or talking to Jenny, like on how to find a small press that's right for your genre? And then we're going to talk about the book tour that you two are on, because this is fun. Anything, or you're like, I don't know, because I just knew Jenny and found her press. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Well, I'll go first, I guess, on that one, and then Christy can go. But like you said, it's a lot of money invested in. So for a small press, they have to be careful. As I could imagine. I mean, I'm not running the publishing house, but yeah, it's a lot of money and a lot of growth that they have to go through so they can continue to rise in this because even publishing world is competitive, writing world's competitive, so is publishing world. So I couldn't imagine juggling all that she does. But my biggest tip would be, if you are going to submit, you always start with their website, because usually they're going to put on there what their vision is and what they look for, and read some of the books that they put out, right? And so all of our books are different. We all have a different voice. Yes, we're writing romance, but Christy's voice is different than my voice, and vice versa, and even Jenny's voice and the other authors that she has on there. But so pick up a couple of them, read them, and then you can get an idea of what they kind of look for. Because I really think that each publishing press, or large house, small house, they all have a different vision, but same at the same time. And so start there, look there, and then you can get an idea. And there's so much information out there. You could even find probably podcasts on what's marketable. What does that mean? And so because there's so much free info out there, do your research, really look. So
Yeah, and I'll just add that there's lists out there. I know Bryn Donovan's got a list on her site of romance publishers that take unagented submissions, and a lot of those are small presses. So I know I looked at that list, and she updates that pretty regularly. She's actually somebody I worked with on some developmental editing on another manuscript who's fabulous. But she keeps that list up. And then Twitter pitch contests. I think a few of the small presses responded when I did a Twitter pitch contest back before I signed with Jenny. And so I learned about a few of them that way. And then just being in groups of writers, especially romance writers on Facebook, you see people talk about the small presses and you see them say good and bad things. And I'm in a 2024 debut Slack, and we have a channel just for small press, and we all talk about our experiences, and they're wildly different in terms of timelines, in terms of what kind of marketing the press does, in terms of what we got in terms of, arcs to give out to readers and influencers. And so I actually said the other day in our group, I'm going to write a blog post, like based on all the things we all experience, like questions to ask before you sign with a small press. But for me, it was much like Lindsay said, look at the website, read some of the books, which I did. For me, the cover was huge. In looking at small presses, I feel like you can weed a lot of them out based on covers alone. Like if you look at Amazon and you look at the top 100 in, romance, or even in some of the niche categories like small town romance or whatever, you can see similar styles, and you can see what's what's aesthetically appealing and what looks professional and what doesn't. And unfortunately, there were some small presses I looked at that I thought I would be so unhappy with any of these covers. Like, this does not look like what I want. Whereas the cover designer at Harpeth Road, Kristen, and I'll get her last name wrong, but Ingebrigtsen. I don't know if Lindsay knows how to say it better than I do, but she does all of our covers, and she is incredible. Like, I changed one thing on my cover. It was just the color of the woman's hair, and I loved everything else about it. And I'm anxiously awaiting my second cover now, but I know I'm going to love it. I've loved Lindsay's covers. I've loved everybody's, and they're all stunning. And so to me, that weeded out a lot of small presses where I just knew I wasn't going to get a cover I was going to be happy with. And then I would look at their books on Amazon and how many reviews are their books getting. And like, reviews are tough. Like, I remember begging my email list when my debut came out to please go leave me reviews so that I could get some more. But I think that says a lot about what the press is doing to help you promote your book. Like, we have a first readers team at Harpeth Road, and a lot of those people left reviews really early on. So I look at the cover, the number of reviews that they've got, and then I talked to authors. Like, once I narrowed that down, I did have a list of like 5 or 6 I was going to submit to. And I talked to authors who had already published and authors who were like currently getting ready for a book to come out. And I asked, what kind of promises did they make you? Did they keep those promises? What did you like best about working with them? What frustrated you about working with them? And that ruled some additional ones out. It's also how I ruled out some agents. So also important questions to talk to former and current clients of agents if you're going to go that route. But just do your research, because all small presses are not created equal.
No, they most definitely are not. And presses across the board, like it's not a regulated industry, and people need to know and understand that. And some person can call themselves a hybrid press and not really fall into the thing. Somebody could call themselves a traditional press, and maybe they don't charge you. But I'm telling you what, I saw one author's book that was published by a traditional press, and it was terrible, like cover bad, editing bad, like all the things. So I appreciate all those tips that you have given, because you should be able to notice when you go to a website, and if the website looks bad, if it's I don't know, websites, I'll cut them some slack on website, because some of these companies are very, very small employees, and the website, they're trying to sell books through other means. But definitely looking at the books published, definitely looking at if they have reviews and all those kinds of things. Those are great things. It sounds like Harpeth does a lot to help you all, even by just the fact that they grow those review teams and have all of that, because like you said, reviews are hard, and having a company that has a built-in review team, first readers team, that's really great. I'm
She also
curious.
has I was just going to say, she also has, which is also different. She has an author portal, right? So us
Mhm.
authors can log in, and she has like these lessons,
Oh,
especially
nice.
if you're brand new.
Right.
Some of the lessons me and Christy already know, but she really puts time into that, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and some of
That's
those come from
wonderful.
questions we ask her. We're like, how do we do this thing? Or, hey, I want to market it like this. And then like 10 minutes later, I'll see her send out an email to all of us that says, I've now put the instructions for this in the portal. Like, as one of us asks questions, she continually, it's probably twice the size it was when I, signed on with her a year and a half ago or so, because she's
That's awesome.
constantly adding new material to it. And Lindsay and I are troublemakers that she has to add new rules for. No, just kidding.
We
But
That
we're
is
trying to
awesome.
like, we try to market outside of the box sometimes, and we're like, how do we do this thing? How do we make it work? Because I've been with a bigger press for my nonfiction, and there are some things about being with a smaller press that take longer or
Yeah.
take a few extra steps, like, which isn't good or bad. It's just different. And so I feel like I'm constantly nagging her with, but I want to do this. Like, how can we make
Right.
that happen?
We annoy her
But
for
she
sure.
figures it out. We're her problem children.
That's funny. Okay, let's talk about the book tour because I think this is, okay, so book tours, both like I know that they're important. Gosh, I know they're so important because getting out and talking to people and building those connections that makes a big difference. But it's one of those things that I've never done myself. So I hear other authors talking about it. I see it, but I'm always fascinated by like the ins and outs of it. Whose idea was it? Was it Jenny's idea? Was it your idea? Was it the three of you? How did the two of you connect?
Christy,
Just, okay, it was Lindsay's idea. Tell us all
Christy.
about it, Lindsay. How'd
This
this
was
come
us
No,
being
about?
no,
her
it was
problem
Christy.
child.
It was Christy's idea, actually. Christy.
This this was us being her problem children. Again, this was not her idea. This was us coming to her and being like, we're going to do this thing. How do we make it work? I had done book signings for my nonfiction books, and I had sort of said I was not going to do any for this book because I had, like, I would say the experiences were all over the map. I had ones with my nonfiction where I sold every book I took, and I had ones where I sat there for 3 hours and I sold two books. And I just frankly didn't enjoy it that much when I did it. And so I was not going to do it this time. It just didn't sell enough books to feel worth it to me. But then Lindsay and I became friends. And then we also sort of became friends with Nancy and brought her into the fold, Nancy Nagel, who ended up doing it with us as well. And we were like, what if we all did it together? And like Nancy's far more accomplished and has been around a lot longer than we have. And I thought at least people will come to see Nancy and then maybe they will discover Lindsay and me because of that. And we just all had become friends over like DMs and email. And it was mostly more about like wanting to meet them in person. And hey, if we sold some books along the way, great. And we all lived sort of in a row between, I'm in Northeast Florida, and then Lindsay had moved to South Carolina. Nancy's in North Carolina. And we all kind of had connections with bookstores sort of along the coast from Myrtle Beach to Savannah, and thought, well, we could pull together something small. Like one week we wanted to hit 3 cities. We only ended up doing two. And we went to the publisher and we were like, hey, we want to do this thing. This was us being her problem child because they're a digital first publisher. Our books are print on demand. And so that makes it a little more complicated to do something with a bookstore, especially really close to our release date,
Yeah.
because it's tough to get it through Ingram and available for the bookstores to order. And bookstores don't want to buy our author copies from Amazon. Most of
Yeah.
them don't want to support Amazon, frankly, although we had great bookstores that made all sorts of concessions for us in order for us to be able to do this tour. But that was one of those where there's now a lesson in the author portal about how to do events at bookstores. And that's thanks to us.
That's
But it ended up being so much fun.
Yeah. It
We
was a
only ended up hitting
success.
2 bookstores, but they were fantastic. They were so wonderful to us. We had so much fun together. We got to create social content together. We stopped at little free libraries between the bookstores and dropped our books.
nice.
But I think like for me, the best part was just meeting Lindsay and Nancy in person. And the books we sold and the readers we met were great too. But like these are connections we'll have for a long time and that we can continue to do events together.
Yeah, I think that what I've seen, especially in the romance world, is that the authors who band together in groups and cross collab, cross promote, do things like this together, like those are the ones that are seeing such big movement because you pull audiences, you bring other people in. When somebody is a big fan of Lindsay's and she introduces her to Savannah Carlisle, and vice versa. Like it just opens you up to so much more opportunity with readers, and I love it because there shouldn't be competition. There should never be competition of people in the same genre, and that's because I know as a romance reader, like I put one down and I'm ready to start the next one. And it takes me like 3 years to do one book. So if I'm just like, oh, wait, my next book is coming and I'm not giving people other books to read, like they're going to forget about me, but I can stay relevant by still promoting other people. So yeah, go ahead. Oh, I thought you
No,
were
I
about to
was
say
just gonna
something.
say that's true. Lindsay and Nancy both write Christmas books and I don't. So I don't have
Right.
another book till next May, but they both have Christmas books coming out that not only can they go promote together, but I'm excited to promote their books because I love both of their writing. I don't know, even if I had a Christmas book, I wouldn't feel competitive, but it gives me something to talk about and
Yeah.
promote between my books because my readers are already like, when is the next one? I'm like, not till May.
And oh,
That's a
by the
long
way,
time.
just yes, exactly. And on the timeline thing, for those of you thinking about writing Christmas books, we are recording this on August 2nd. I have no idea when this episode is going to come on, but it's August 2nd. And the Christmas books are already coming out and being marketed. So whenever anybody's like, well, I'm going to write a Christmas book and I'm going to launch it in November, I'm like, okay, try July. Try July to hit that Christmas market. Lindsay, do you have anything to add to this whole discussion?
I just think it was really good for even if you don't make it to our signing, people see it on social media and
Yeah.
they see us interacting and they can connect to that, right? It's just human nature. So I had a lot of readers that were like, "Oh, I wish I was in those areas, but I'm not." But it was such a joy to see you out there and do that because it really just makes it pulls you away from the screen because fiction writers can be recluse
Mm-hmm.
because we're just in our own worlds all the time. I mean, I love being in my fiction world. I don't like this real world sometimes. So it's like it's our escape. And so being out into the world, even just to show people, is encouraging. It encourages other writers as well. And I, even if it's a small crowd or a large crowd, right? You're building, what I think you're doing is you're building avid readers. So you can have a one-timer come through, read one of your books, love it, but then, maybe they're not going to read the next ones. Building those like true avid readers is what it's really all about because they're the ones that are going to turn around. So even if like one person showed up, right, and they love your book and they become an avid reader, they're going to turn around and give it to the next person, right? And it becomes this like, so I feel it's a very effective marketing, a very effective marketing to do for many different reasons. And then
Yeah.
of course, yeah, I got to hang out with Christy and Nancy and we just had so much fun. So
I believe it. I believe it. I wish I could have met up with y'all when you were touring down the coast. It's
We talked
fun.
about you though. You were there in spirit. We talked about you.
I love that. Oh my gosh, what's so much fun. And I really, we've covered so much ground here today, but I mean, the reality is I think that new authors in general, we need to have like really good expectations of what's to come. I mean, we've been spoiled by what we see in movies and even books about other authors. I always love, now that I am an author, I always love reading books who authors set the main character as an author, right? But even some of those they're really sometimes very unrealistic for what we should expect. Like I think it sets the mind frame for people that it's going to be quick, that they're going to make a lot of money from advances and they're going to go on these big New York book tours. And that's just not the reality for most of us. However, that doesn't mean that you can't still be a very successful author, just on a different path. So to wrap this up, I would love it. And I don't know who we start with, eeny, meeny, miny, well, we'll start with Lindsay. Do tips on for new writers, for new romance writers in particular, but fiction writers, they probably apply to both.
yeah, I always love to give, there's so many tips I can give, right? And doesn't mean I'm an expert by any means, but I've learned a thing or two after publishing now too. I need to update my bio because I have Fly Away Summer out as
I know,
well.
that's why I was like, and other books, because I couldn't
Yes,
remember the
yes.
name.
Thank you. I'm going to update that. And then I have the Christmas coin coming out in October.
Nice.
So, but the one tip that I love to give people is when you're writing fiction, and this is just the psychology in me, it's the mental health part of it. Because one of the questions I was asked recently on a blog interview that I did was, how do you make your characters so real life? And because I love that about the most recent one that she read in Fly Away Summer. And I love that question because it kind of cycles us back to the first question you asked, and me putting my own self into a fiction character. Every time I'm writing a scene, if it's a scene that I want to get those feels, because that's very important, especially in romance, you're trying to pull the heartstrings, right? You really got to step back sometimes and ask yourself, well, how would I respond? How would I respond in this situation? There are moments where I'm on a flow and then I write and then I read back and I'm like, what was that? But and I gotta fix that. But then if I find myself stuck a little bit, that's a good thing. So don't be afraid to get those stuck moments, because sometimes writer blocks can block you to try to move it into a better direction. And just ask yourself, okay, if I was this character right now, what am I feeling? And then just go with that. And literally, because you have to show, not tell, right? So what does that mean? Like, show, not tell. Okay. Like, don't just say, I'm sad, right? Where are you feeling it in your body? And sometimes you have to pull yourself out and put yourself into it. And that, psychology of the character, or whatever you want to call it. But it's very important in the romance world. We want to get all those feels. So
it's so funny. I've sat through hour-long workshops on showing, not telling. And I think in that under 1 minute information, you just described it better than some of the workshops I've sat through, like putting yourself in there and feeling it. Like, how do I feel it? I envision every character as myself when I'm writing a book. So I think that helps too, because you are, but it's hard. It's hard to bring those emotions forward. I love that. Next time I'm stuck, I'm going to be like, okay,
it's not a bad thing.
How would I be feeling this? Like, what would I be doing if this happened to me? Or if I can think of a situation where I was that angry or that sad or that mad or that disappointed, like, great advice. Great advice. All right, Christy.
Yeah, that's a tough act to follow, but I was thinking one thing that always shocks me, I'm in a bunch of different writing groups on Facebook, and one thing that always sort of blows my mind is when a writer is writing in a genre they don't read.
Yes!
And they'll
This
be
drives me
saying it in the
nuts.
group, like, I don't like romance, but I see that it's selling well. I like, psychological thrillers and whatever, but I'm going to write in romance because I think it sells better. Can you give me some advice for writing romance? It's like, yeah, read some
Yes.
because and I know people who will say that they don't read books in their genre while they're actively like in the middle of a draft because they don't want to like accidentally borrow from that author. I've never felt like that. I've
No.
always read really widely in my genre, and especially like I write small town contemporary romance, like very Hallmark. Not only do I read a lot of different authors in that space, I watch every Hallmark movie that comes
Same.
out. I actually write about Hallmark movies for on the journalism side too. And so like after a while, you sort of get the beats. People talk about Hallmark movies being formulaic, and they are, but that's what people love about them. They know what to
Yes.
expect. Like people
Yes.
love the formula, and the book beats are a little bit different. You've got more time than you have in a 2-hour TV movie. And so sort of my related second piece of advice is I think that I read a lot of craft books. I took a lot of classes. I think the one I learned the most from is by Gwen Hayes. It's called Romancing the Beat.
Yes,
And
that's a
it
great
takes
one.
beat structure. Yeah, everybody says read Save the Cat, which I did. And Save the Cat comes from screenwriting, but there's Save the Cat writes a novel. It is fantastic. And I recommend reading it too. But Romancing the Beat takes that and then condenses it down and makes it just applicable to romance and says for romance, here's what the beats are. And that was really helpful to me. And she uses examples from movies and books. And I own the physical copy. I'm looking at it over here. I own the physical copy of the book and I own the audio book. And I can't even tell you how many times I've re-listened to it or flipped through the book. Gwen Hayes has resources on her website too if you buy the book. And one of them is a spreadsheet that has the beats. And I used that early on. I don't use it anymore because like now I know it. But when I was writing my first couple of manuscripts, I like lived and died by that spreadsheet and trying to hit those beats just right. And the more you read, then you're reading and you're like, oh, that's that beat and that's that beat. Like it all just starts to come together, but you have to be reading in your genre. I do not understand writing in a genre you don't read. Or even like I read thrillers and I don't want to write thrillers because that looks really hard to me. So I read those.
Psychological
I'm not gonna
thrillers are
branch
very
out.
helpful. Psychological
Yes.
thrillers are so helpful in writing psychology of the character. You got to read those.
They are.
It's so true. No, I'm with you so much. And I'm so glad that you said that because this is something that is one of my biggest pet peeves too. I'm like, how can you possibly? And on that note, don't just jump on a bandwagon because it's selling well. Like, for example, right now, hockey romances are selling really well. I am not going to abandon everything that I'm working on to write a hockey romance just because I could never do it service. Write what you know, write what you're passionate about. It'll be so much easier. And to the point about feeling, I've heard authors say that too. I won't read in my genre because I don't want to steal other people's ideas. There's no stealing ideas in romance. Like, that's to your point. In each subgenre of romance, there is a formula and a structure. Like, they're all the same. You just insert different characters in a little bit different situation.
Whatever you want to do, it's been done before. Like I
Exactly.
used You've Got Mail as a jumping off point. I have a social media post, and I think I did a blog post on it, of all the books I read that had that You've Got Mail sort of premise. And we all did it differently. And in fact, I think we're all putting together a big giveaway we're going to do together. All of our books are wildly different takes on it, but they all started from that idea of people who are somehow exchanging notes or messages, and they don't know, they're anonymous, but they know each other in real life and they hate each other. And like
Right.
and we all adapted that in incredibly different ways. And so I don't worry about copying somebody else. Like right now, I'm worried I'm chasing a trend, even though I'm not trying to. I started working on a summer camp book a while back, and that's the next book I want to pick up and finish. And there have been all these big summer camp books last year and this year. And I'm afraid that by the time I could get it out in 2026 or 2027, summer camp books will be over and I'll be devastated because I was not chasing the trend and then it became one. And now I feel like people are going to think I'm too late to the party. But like, I love summer camp books. I've read like 8 of them now, and I did a whole blog post on all of them because when people love something about a book like hockey or summer camp
Mhm.
or You've Got Mail or whatever, they will read every book that has it. So
Yes.
don't worry about copying other people as long as you're
Right.
not straight up plagiarizing someone.
Right.
Don't worry
Right.
that your idea is similar. There's another book
Agreed.
even like The Library of Second Chances about exchanging notes in a little free library. And it comes out this fall, and I was devastated when I saw it. And my publisher was like, it wasn't an original idea anyway. Like,
Right.
okay, you're right. It wasn't.
Well, that's such a, oh my gosh. But it's funny because you can't steal ideas. And like you said, if the writing is good and if the character development is good and if people love your book, and oh, by the way, trends recycle. I mean, there was a phase where vampire books were super, super, and then they went out. Like if you were submitting a vampire book to an agent for like a 10-year window, they were like, no, we don't want to take it. They're not popular. They're back again. And guess what? The fans of vampire books, it doesn't even matter. Like, I love vampires. I'll read anything about vampires. Like, it doesn't matter. I don't care about the trend. I love vampires. So, yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't be worried about stuff like that. Write. Just write and the books good and get them published. And don't worry about all the other stuff. There
everybody's
was,
everybody's voice is different too. You're going to
yes,
put a different spin on what the characters are feeling, even if it's the same storyline. Everybody's different. So yeah, don't worry about it.
absolutely. I too, as a side note, own Romancing the Beat both in print book and in audio. I had to check to make sure I had the audio book. I need to go back and re-listen to it again. But great book. I'm
Okay.
going to add that link to our show notes as well. And just remember, like, working on your craft, I don't think is something that ever like goes out. I mean, we're always improving as writers, right? And well, I don't know, maybe when we get to the point of some of these big huge names, we don't have to work on craft anymore. I don't know, but it's always evolving. But oh my gosh, y'all, we could literally talk for days. I think this has been such a fun interview. Quickly let everybody know where they can go and find your books wherever you want them to. Do you want to send them to your website or to another page, wherever you want them to go? And Christy, I hope I can, well, as Christy, not Savannah, I hope that we wind up doing a workshop on travel blogs and writing travel stuff for the Women in Publishing Summit, because that I'm so interested in too. But okay, Lindsay, where do we get your books?
My website, authorlindsay.com, has all my info, all the info on my books. And of course, my books are available on Amazon and, all the online retailers, Barnes and Noble. I don't know. I'm not
All
sure
the
where.
places. And
Yeah,
she's an AY Lindsay, not an EY. So
right.
LINDSAY, author Lindsay Gibson.com. And of course, these will be in the notes, either on the player, wherever you're listening to this podcast, or at womeninpublishingsummit.com/podcast. Savannah Carlisle, where do you want all your new and excited readers to go learn about your books?
SavannahCarlisle.com has everything on my first book and now my second book. And I review tons of other books. I write about the books I'm reading as well. So there's lots of that on there too. And then on social media, I have the same handle on all of them. And it's at Savvy Carlisle because Savannah Carlisle didn't fit on one of the platforms. So 2 V's in Savvy, at Savvy Carlisle on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the things. I think I'm on everything but Snapchat.
There
We're
we
not doing
go.
that.
I know, no snap. We're too old for Snapchat. I'm just gonna go ahead
I'm
and
too
put
old
it
for
out there.
TikTok too,
Oh
but
my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, ladies, so much. I look forward to seeing all the things that come out of your books. Make sure you do follow them on social media too. I think if you're an aspiring author in a genre or a growing author, it's always important to see how other authors are marketing themselves, marketing their books, and emulating that as you grow your own platform. So thank you both very, very much. I can't wait to hear about your successes in the future. And obviously I'll be in touch with both of you. Since you're my friends. All right. Have a great day.
Thank you, Alexa.
You don't have to give me your heart. You don't have to give it away.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast. We hope to see you back for the next episode. Great, huge thanks goes to Jasmine Commerce for the use of her song. You can find Jasmine on SoundCloud. Go check out all of her music. We'll see you next time.